Now we move on to the NFC North, where we see the Chicago Bears starting out with Chandler Jones at defensive end, trying to get back to that solid Bears defense that really hasn't been a reality in this franchise. The Donald Stevenson offensive tackle, Corey White at strong safety, Vinny Curry at defensive end, and they go with Mike Harris at cornerback, and then Andrew Tiller in the 7th round. When looking at this Bears depth chart, we have Jason Campbell, who is going to start over the Chicago Bears. He was traded for because the Falcons got Peyton Manning, and Jason Campbell, who has led the Falcons to number 1 seeds and number 2 seeds. But they haven't been able to go deep in the playoffs. So they decided to take a chance on Peyton Manning, and Manning had many options, and Manning chose Atlanta, which is a team with Larry Fitzgerald and a number 1 defense or top 5 defense. So Campbell is now off to Chicago, and we'll see if Campbell is able to do what Sanchez couldn't do, and that's go far in the playoffs. Because Sanchez has gotten there before, but he just doesn't play as well, where Campbell has the chance to do that despite his lower overall. They do have Mark Ingram, who hasn't really been the star running back that we've hoped him to be, but Glenn Coffey, Corey Sheets behind him, not giving him much competition for the starting job. They do have Mike Carney at fullback, Golden Tate, their star receiver, Eddie Royal, Kevin Ogletree. Royal comes over to them from their rival Vikings. So that was a great addition by them. We see Dustin Keller. They pick up from the Miami Dolphins, the AFC champions. Then the backups there aren't great. As for offensive line, we see Jeff Otah at 72 overall, and Donald Stevenson not far behind him. I mean, that's the rookie 3rd-round pick that he might be able to start someday. We'll see if he's able to progress and challenge Otah for left tackle. As we see the interior line, other than David Deal, Jason Kelsey, not as high as I thought he would be rated. We see Tiller, actually, he's showing up there at backup center, and Carl Johnson competing with Carl Johnson as a backup. Kyle Cook at 71, not much better. And John Jerry and Alex Barron kind of competing at right tackle, but we are giving the start to John Jerry. And then we move on to the defense side, and we see Brian Robinson at left end, rookie Chandler Jones at right end. They do have Carricker at right end. Now, the big splash was getting Tommy Harris at defensive tackle. So in real life, Tommy Harris was drafted by Chicago. In my franchise, he went to Washington. But now Tommy Harris comes to Chicago in his later years. Jonathan Babineau and Sean Lissamore behind him. But Harris really elevates this defense, gives them kind of that run stopper that they've desperately needed. Justin Houston, big man, solid linebacker. Keith Rivers on the other side. Keith Rivers was their first pick I ever made for them back in 2003. Rolando McClain, we know he's not the middle linebacker powerhouse he was supposed to be, but he was a top pick of the Chicago Bears. One of the second best acquisitions. They get Tommy Harris from free agency, but they also get Lito Shepherd from the Philadelphia Eagles. And that gives them their anchor, solid cornerback behind, and then behind him is Crescent Butler, Byron Maxwell, some decent cornerbacks, but again, they didn't have much star power, but now Lito Shepherd gives them that veteran presence. As for safety, both Malcolm Jenkins and Roman Harper are good safeties, solid contributors. Jenkins definitely has more upside because I think Harper is going to be getting up there in age. As for return, Shepherd can return kicks, Ogletree can, Zenon. Glenn Coffey did a lot last year. But their kickers are Justin Medlock and Chris Klue. But as I said, the Bears are a team that can surprise. But we have to see if was Jason Campbell's success his environment in Atlanta, or was he the reason for the success? And that's going to be interesting to find out this year. The Detroit Lions have gone for quarterback with the 4th overall pick, getting Ryan Tannehill. Then they get offensive tackle Jonathan Martin, along with Nick Toon at wide receiver, Casey Hayward at cornerback. Later in the draft, they go with Vontez Burfict. That's a solid pick there, big hitter. We have Justin Bethel at free safety, and then Jay Howard at defensive tackle. So the Detroit Lions do fire Chris Palmer. They move on from him. They bring in Patriots defensive coordinator Rob Ryan. So Rex Ryan's in Buffalo. Rob Ryan is here in Detroit. And we see Tannehill being backed up by Josh McCown, Mike Teal replacing Brody Croyle, and the kind of a mediocre past few seasons for Detroit. They do have all-star running back Reggie Bush, behind him Danny Woodhead, both of them kind of receiving backs, which has been very advantageous for the Lions. Owen Marisick at fullback and Jaquez Rogers as their third string. They do have Jason Hill, Mario Manningham, but then it kind of slips down for Brian Walters, Armonte Edwards, Austin Pettis. Not as solid receivers there. Tight ends, you see Zach Miller, Chris Cooley, Jake Ingram. Nothing special there, so they have some work to do at tight end. They used to have Todd Heap, but they ended up moving on from him. Tyron Smith, left tackle. He was the pick, I think, a year or two ago. Antoine Caldwell, left guard. Alex Mack at 80. Mike Iupati. And then we see Maurice Williams, who does get the start over their second-round pick rookie, Jonathan Martin, which you would expect from being 8 overall points. For defense, they have Connor Barwin and Daquan Bowers on the left side, and Calvin Pace and Jarvis Moss on the right. I might try to get Daquan Bowers more into the fray because I think he was their first or second round pick last year. High selection. You see Kyle Williams and Vance Walker, Earl Mitchell as DT. But the big star on this entire team, one of the biggest ones, is Lawrence Timmons. We'll see if he doesn't get totally pissed off that they keep losing. I think he's going to have some morale issues. But we see Perry Riley Jr. at 67 overall. I expected more from Vontaze Burfict to be a higher overall start because he was a very hard-hitting middle linebacker. But 60 seems low for him, but that's where he starts. Akeem Jordan, 74 overall. At cornerback, we see Brandon Carr, the rookie Casey Hayward getting the start. Michael Coe, Kevin Thomas, and DeMarcus Van Dyke. We also see the addition of Will Demps, or not addition of, but in the backfield or in the secondary, we'd see Will Demps, Justin Bethel, and then Madu Williams and Gerald Alexander. Not anything to brag about. As for kick return, we see Austin Pettis, Brandon Carr, Nick Toon, all options. Bueller at kicker, and then Pat McAfee for Detroit's punter. Detroit, I'm not expecting much from this team. I think Green Bay is going to be solid. I think Minnesota might bounce back with their selection. We'll talk about them later. And then I think Chicago is either going to be really good or really bad. As for Detroit, I have a very low ceiling for them. The Green Bay Packers get Janoris Jenkins as cornerback in the first round, Peter Kahns in the second, Ronnie Hillman in the third at running back, Lamar Holmes at offensive tackle there in the fourth, Devier Posey, wide receiver from Ohio State, Sean Prater from cornerback, and Markel Martin. This possibly could be one of the worst drafts of this year, quite frankly. But as we look at their depth chart, though, Mike Tomlin's working with Matthew Stafford. He's got Drew Stanton. Now, Drew Stanton and Jeff Smoker come as free agent acquisitions. Jeff Smoker's my journeyman backup that never should have been, so I kind of adore him. Only being a 61 overall, but he's got a few starts in his career that in real life he never had. LeSean McCoy, James Starks, and then the rookie there at running back. LeSean McCoy, definitely a key factor in this offense. Vontae Leach as well, good fullback for them. Wide receivers, their top three are pretty good. Randall Cobb, Antonio Brown, and Julian Edelman. They do sign Dante Stallworth, and I'll see if he stays on the roster throughout the entire year. I don't think he contributes that much. I don't know if I'd rather have DeVere Posey, the rookie, or even whoever the hell Steven Williams is, try to get more reps. But you see Jordan Cameron, the rookie I believe last year, Martrez Milner, and Tony Moecki at tight end. We see left tackle like Russell Okung, the big man, Brandon Albert, Jeff Fain, Rodney Hudson, and Jeremy Parnell, which is a very good offensive line for, not very good, but I guess we would call it adequate. I guess really the only good one is Brandon Albert, and then Russell Okung is a pretty solid left tackle. And then as we transition to defense, we see Ray Edwards Henry Melton as the two ends. They have Vince Wilfork, and they used to have Darnell Dockett and Vince Wilfork drafted in the same draft class, but Darnell Dockett has really declined in overall, and maybe it's because he didn't get as much play time with Vince Wilfork. But Johnny Jolly is now the backup, along with Fila Mola. I might need to think about how I want to change, but until then, we're keeping this. But this is where the team changes drastically. So they always had Sean Merriman at left outside linebacker. Last year, they had the first overall pick, and they went with Von Miller. Now, I wanted to make a splash with them. So I went out, and I was the Packers were one of the teams, many teams, that went after DeMarcus Ware. But they got him. So they have the number 1 left outside linebacker, number 1 right outside linebacker, and then like a top 3, top 5 left outside linebacker with Sean Merriman. So putting him at middle linebacker is just utilizing my resources. But you got DeMarcus Ware and Von Miller pass rushing you. That's crazy. So they are star-studded on defense this year. Even Daniel Ellerbe is not a bad middle linebacker, and he's backing up Sean Merriman. Cornerbacks like Nnamdi Asomugha, Brandon Browner, 2 great cornerbacks. Asomugha is getting older. That's where the Janoris Jenkins pick comes in, because Jenkins can be that nickel cornerback this year, and maybe we see him transition to being a second stringer behind Brandon Browner as Asomugha may start to decline. Free safeties, Usama Young and Markel Martin and James Sanders and Kurt Coleman. Neither of them are that special, but they are suitable for now. But really the goal of this team is they have shutdown cornerbacks and they have an insane pass rush along with some solid run stoppers like Melton and Wilfork. Now, Stallworth gets his worth from the return game. I try not to have LeSean McCoy do too much returning just because I want him to be fresh. But Martin Gramatica at kicker and Steve Weatherford at punter. Good addition for this Green Bay Packers team. I do think they are likely the team to beat for the NFC North. And then the Minnesota Vikings, who had a really bad year last year despite Brett Favre leading the league in passing. But with that, Favre retires, which is one more year than he ever had. And that leads to drafting Robert Griffin III to the Minnesota Vikings with the 2nd overall pick. Then they go for a running back, Doug Martin, in the 2nd round. Justin Anderson at guard in the 3rd. Olivier Vernon, a solid pass rusher here in the 4th round. Then they go with Brandon Thompson, DT, Tommy Streeter at receiver, another defensive lineman with Jonathan Massaquoi, and then Emmanuel Acho at outside linebacker. Now, this depth chart, we see Ryan Mallett was the destined starter for after Brett Favre era, but Norv Turner is fired, and there's a new coach in town, Perry Fewell, the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. So he decides he wants his own guy, and he goes for Robert Griffin III because you can't pass up a star like that. And so Ryan Mallett and Brian Hoyer are behind Robert Griffin. Doug Martin fills in for Kevin Smith, who went to the Kansas City Chiefs. So Doug Martin gets the starting job here in Minnesota, and behind him is Pierre Thomas and Alex Green. The receivers, Doug Baldwin I don't love as their starting receiver, but he's there nonetheless. They do have Mike Wallace. They have the oddly enough veteran Chad Jackson, who has had a decent career in my franchise. But then there's Tommy Streeter, the rookie, along with Kerry Meyer. Rob Gronkowski, who has not really made that much of an impact in this franchise. He was I expected more from him. I thought he was going to really blow out and just destroy the league, but he hasn't. He's dropped passes. Maybe part of it was just Brett Favre not doing as well, but we'll see if Robert Griffin III better utilizes Rob Gronkowski. As for left tackle, they pick up Joe Staley from Pittsburgh. Big addition there. Javon Meredith, mediocre. O'Neal Cousins, mediocre. Justin Anderson, who's their third round pick, not anywhere near competing with Cousins, but he could have. Max Unger at 77, and then Ryan Harris, their solid man there at right tackle. But then we start seeing their defense. And their defense, they have old man Jared Allen And then they sign old man Dwight Freeney. So they have 2 solid pass rushers, and they have Olivier Vernon, who's the young pass rusher. They have Nick Fairley, they drafted, I believe it was last year or 2 years ago, whenever the hell they got him. And so he's supposed to be their solid anchor, and Demario Presley is backing him up. As for their linebacking core, they have Chad Greenway and Ernie Sims, some older linebackers that were drafted in the late 2000s. Chase Blackburn at middle linebacker, Dakota Watson, who I do like Dakota. I think he's been a solid player for them. But as for cornerback, you see him pick up, they had Leon Hall, and they pick up Aqib Talib from Pittsburgh. So 2 solid Pittsburgh contributions there. We see Rasheem Mathis, who was a former defensive rookie of the year, basically, back in 2003, aging tremendously. Rock Carmichael is above him in the depth chart. As for safeties, we see Will Allen, and they signed Tom Zibrakowski at strong safety. They lost Michael Griffin to free agency. He went to the Jaguars, which was a terrible choice on his part. I don't like it at all, but that's where he chose to go. So Zibrakowski comes in to replace him, and we'll see how much that hurts them. But they do lose Griffin, but they pick up Aqib Talib, so we'll see if that offsets the damage. As for return, there's no one really solid here. Palmer and Pierre Thomas. They do have the best kicker in the league, Matt Prater, and they do have Brandon Fields at punter. This is a team that has a lot of opportunity to bounce back here, and I think that they will at some point.